I'm Mike Uyak. I love to try new things, and I've had culinary adventures all around the world, as well as right at home. I've had really wonderful food, as well as some really horrible food. I'd like to share some of my adventures with you, and we'll see if I have what it takes to fix whatever goes wrong. This is Recipe Redemption. Pudding. It's a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In the American culinary tradition, it's typically a dessert, milk based, thickened with either a gelatin or agar or something, sometimes egg yolk, but generally a gelatin. And it's almost exclusively a dessert. There is a subset with bread puddings, which we're not going to get into, where you can go savory. But generally speaking, when you think pudding in America, you think dessert. It comes from an English tradition of puddings that were more, they're more bread based, or at least more grain based, and they're boiled. They can be either dessert or savory. But over the centuries, the meaning of the word as sort of the boiled savory puddings became less prevalent in English cuisine. You got more of the dessert puddings, the sticky toffee pudding, the figgy pudding, the plum pudding that you get. So it came to mean more of a sweet boiled dish that eventually came to mean just dessert in general. So in Britain, a lot of times people will just ask, what do we have for pudding? And the answer could be cake or pie or ice cream. And it confuses the hell out of Americans sometimes because, like, I thought we were having pudding. We are. Here's your cake. It's confusing. Um, to muddy the waters a little bit more is this recipe for fluffy mackerel pudding. I'm going to repeat that because it bears repeating. Fluffy mackerel pudding. Now, the fluffy mackerel pudding just feels weird to say that. The fluffy mackerel pudding comes once again from Weight Watchers from 1974. Here it is. It's green. Here's how it's made.
Okay, going into my food processor are chunks of celery and green pepper, and I am effectively going to puree this. I mean, chop it up really quite fine until it's like a slurry. Now to that, in my bowl I'm adding mackerel. Calls for canned mackerel. I had a hard time finding it, so I have smoked mackerel here, flaked up. Also some onion flake, some prepared mustard, salt, cayenne pepper, mace, and cardamom. I'm just going to mix that up real well and then add an egg, which is going to be my binder, and just mix all that together. Now I'm just going to pour this into a more appropriate ramekin and bake at 350 for 40 minutes. Then garnish with optional sliced egg.
Now, I know I can be a bit of a prescriptivist sometimes. I say, oh, you call that a blank, but that's not really a blank because, A, B, and C. It doesn't have this, it doesn't feature this. You substituted this, and those things, there are things that are required in order to call it that, but you didn't do that. In the same way here, I'm kind of going there because this is not a pudding, in the sense that it is not dairy based. It is just egg that has set this up. Um, and so, you have your fish, you have your vegetables, um, egg, seasonings, and that's pretty much it. So really, this is a frittata when you come right down to it. Okay, am I splitting hairs? Sure, but when you think of a pudding, and especially when you think of pudding in America, the last thing you think is, yeah, I'd like a pudding, but it needs to have more fish in it. Mackerel is a fairly strong, fairly oily fish. It's not horrible. Because I have the chunks of mackerel in there. Um, it's it's got some texture to it. It's not completely, pudding custard like really. But it's not exactly a pleasing texture. There is a certain bitterness to it now. Processing the green pepper and celery um, makes them lends kind of a mushy texture to this, despite the chunks of mackerel. And despite the seasoning, it's a little bit bitter and it's a little bit bland. And okay, this is kind of supposed to be diet food. Mind you, this is actually, per the recipe, considered 2 servings, but it's about the smallest that I could actually do, given the amount of fish that I ended up having. But again, you kind of wonder. No, you kind of wonder if the idea is to make something so unappetizing that you lose weight because you never eat any of it. You never finish what you cook. Oh, that's kind of horrible. The more I eat it. Now, the whole concept of a mackerel pudding is putting me off. It kind of, I can't really go for it. But I was thinking, in the frittata direction, if you had most basically the same ingredients but in a different format, if you weren't going for something that was more pudding like, if you actually did add the dairy, but you put it in a crust and turn it into more of a mackerel quiche, would that actually be better? One way to find out.
Yes, I'm using pre-made pie dough. Sue me. Just pressing this into my ramekin and kind of rolling the edges a little bit just to make it pretty, I guess. And I'm going to be using a lot of the same ingredients. I have the smoked mackerel here, which I've flaked up. And just for giggles, I'm also going to add some of the smoked hake that I picked up. I don't really know why, but I have it, so I'm adding it in addition to the same vegetables I used before. Here's some diced onion, and they're obviously not going to be pureed like before. I'm going to actually dice them up. Little onion, little green pepper, and the addition of some sharp cheddar cheese I thought would actually benefit here. Right, set that aside, and in a measuring cup I have 1 whole egg and 1 egg yolk, to which I am adding a 1/4 cup of cream. And whisking to combine. It's nice actually having a slightly taller measuring cup because I can do this with my whisk to combine my Royale. That's a custard base. Now, got my quiche back. Gonna season with salt and pepper. And then pour on my Royale. And if I've guesstimated things properly, this should be just enough. When you're doing this, because the egg is actually going to expand a little bit as it cooks, you don't want to completely submerge your quiche in the Royale. It should be just up to where you can see it at the top level. Oh, and I forgot to add some garlic powder and onion powder to this, so I'll have to stir that in. And then I, once again, bake this at 350 for about 40 minutes, just like the fluffy mackerel pudding. But hopefully this will end up being quite a lot better.
So what we have is just pie crust. Mostly the same ingredients. I still have the, in this case, smoked mackerel, along with a little bit of the smoked hake that I had. Um, all the same vegetables. In addition to the egg, I also had some cream in order to make it a royale, a quiche custard, and then some cheese. Fish and cheese. On one hand, seems kind of strange. On the other, I know you've had a fillet of fish, uh, and I know most of you secretly enjoyed it. So it's not really a weird idea. And also, there's a big trend toward things like lobster mac and cheese and things like that. So fish and cheese don't necessarily clash if you know what you're doing. Not saying that I do. But let's see if basically the same ingredients actually work better as a quiche. Now the filling seems to be a little bit actually fluffier than the fluffy mackerel pudding. My mouth really doesn't want to say those words in that order. It's really weird. But it seems to have set up quite nicely. Mm. And it's weird because the only real difference, other than putting it in a pie crust, is the cheese and the milk. Is dairy. And the saltiness and smokiness of the smoked mackerel gets, the edges kind of get softened, and it almost, there is a fishy flavor to it, but it almost tastes like ham, which is weird. Mm. The buttery crust does actually add a different dimension to it. This is delicious. I'm actually kind of surprised this turned out as well as it did, because the ingredients are more or less the same. I left some little bones in. That's the only drawback with the mackerels. There's so many tiny little bones. You're never going to get them all. So some care needs to be taken in consuming this. Okay. Larger chunk of the mackerel gave me a little bit more of a burst of fishy flavor, but it's still not as pronounced, kind of in your face fish. It's there, but it's definitely more just playing well with others, I guess. That is delicious. So, what do you think? I don't recommend that you try the fluffy mackerel pudding, but the fish quiche is actually quite delicious. I would actually recommend that you try this. So let me know what you think in the comments below. If you do try it, let me know what you think of it. Ooh. I'm going to have fish breath, but that's okay. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I'll see you here again next time on Recipe Redemption.